Right now, Washington is one of just 5 states that does not require clergy to report child abuse. Senator Noel Frame wants to change that. She's introduced Senate Bill 5375, a bill that would make clergy mandated reporters, with no exception for what's said in a religious confession. That's proved to be a controversial stance for faith groups like the Washington State Catholic Conference and other religious leaders, which strongly oppose the bill.
The rite of penance, as the term rite indicates, is a liturgy. It's an act of worship. It's prayer. For us, the seal of confession is essential to the rite because a penitent has the right to confess their sins without worrying their sins will become public. The penalty for breaking that seal is excommunication.
I talked to Senator Frame today to find out why historically bills like this have stalled, her response to critics of the bill, and how her own experience as a survivor highlights why mandatory reporting is so important. I also asked her how people across the country can support this bill as it makes its way to the House committee on the 14th. This is obviously a very busy time for Senator Frame, and I really appreciate her stepping aside for a few minutes today to take my call and discuss SB 5375. For context and clarity, this call took place today, March 11th, 2025, at 5:37 p.m. Eastern. The call lasted 8 minutes, and I left her answers completely unedited. Here's our conversation. There's been several people who have considered this bill to be a violation of religious liberty. The Washington State Catholic Conference urged parishioners to oppose the bill and support SB 5665, which they say would protect children and religious liberty. Why do you think there's no room for compromise or meeting halfway here?
Yeah, so as I spoke to in my remarks on the bill, we have case law here in Washington State that's actually previously taken up the issue of mandated reporter laws as it relates to religious institutions and found that where the legislature has a secular legislative purpose, and there's additional parts of this test, but let me just focus on that part where there's a secular legislative purpose. It is avoiding the issues that have been flagged around issues of entanglement with religious liberty. So in this case, and in that case law, we pointed to what the court said was that the protection of children is of the utmost importance for the state, and that was a significant enough secular legislative purpose that overcame other objections. And my point here was that we have an interest as a state to protect children. This is only asking that we report when we know that children are being abused or neglected so that we can take action. So we believe that it's actually a pretty clear separation of church and state issue in favor of the state having a specific legislative purpose in intervening.
Why do you think there's been such a pushback from religious communities to this bill?
Well, I think for many religious communities, they have been under the microscope for some time about covering up abuse. And I think, first of all, I think this is just attention. Yeah. I think it's just generally attention that many of them do not want.
Sure.
And they are asserting that their practices and their traditions are more important than state law. And we just fundamentally disagree.
Right.
And in fact, they focus so much about the perpetrator and the rights of the perpetrator to, seek penance and ask for forgiveness and, and particularly from the Catholic Conference. And, what I have really leaned in to say is this is not actually about the perpetrator at all. We're not modifying the part of the statute that relates to prosecution, and we're not changing current privileges about not testifying against folks that reveal this information in a penitential context. This is a completely different part of the statute, and we are focused very specifically just on the safety of the child. Right. And so you could have somebody report so that the child is checked on, and that may be it. It may. Right. So I just think it's just there's a lot of conflation of issues here, and I think when you really get down to it, it's just about protecting kids.
Right. Well, I appreciate you've been so candid when talking about this bill that it hits close to home for you, and I know your personal story speaks to the importance of what a mandatory reporter can do. How did that experience personally inform your perspective on these topics?
Yeah, so when I first started introducing this bill 3 years ago after this reporting by Investigate West, pointing to the fact that, but for the fact that there's a mandated reporter law, Jehovah's Witnesses in particular are prevented by their religious practices from reporting. So it was really important that we had that in place. And for me, I first started talking publicly about my own experience as a child who was sexually abused in 2015. And I think it was really when the story came out and it really focused on the mandated reporter piece of it, I think it was some reflection for me personally about my own story and how it came about that I was able to stop the abuse. And at a really personal level, just really connecting those dots and feeling like, this is going to be a tough fight, but I'm the right person to lean in and lead the fight. And my former state representative, Mary Lou Dickerson, had tried to run this bill 20 years ago. She knew my personal story, and so she encouraged me strongly to take a lead on this. And of course, she was right. So sure. For me, because it was me telling a teacher is ultimately what helped the abuse stop for me, became clear to me that kids that rely on religious leaders as their trusted adults in their lives should also have comfort in knowing that those adults will help them if they ask for help.
I appreciate your time so far. I have one last question, and I was blown away. I've been covering clergy abuse for the last several years, and for the first year or so, it was just something I said where, of course, pastors are mandated reporters, and I became aware that there were loopholes, and I think the majority of the people I've talked to have said they didn't know there were loopholes for clergy. They didn't know that there were these ways where they weren't mandated reporters. But clearly there's been people who've been working. You mentioned bills trying to push forward 20 years ago. You, for the last 3 years, have been trying to push this bill forward. With the bill scheduled for hearing in the House on March 14th, 2025, are you optimistic it's going to pass this time? And is there anything people who are passionate about seeing bills like this pass can do to help voice their support?
I am indeed very optimistic that the bill will pass this year. The House committee that will be hearing this bill has already passed an identical version of this bill out of committee this year with bipartisan support. That is the House companion sponsored by Representative Amy Wallen. So I have a degree of confidence it will get out of committee. And I think folks that want to be helpful, we have a process here in Washington State where you can sign in and support. You can log into our legislative system, go to the hearing date, pick the bill and say, I want to sign in. And you can choose to testify if you're somebody who would want to testify on camera or in person. But those who choose not to do that can simply sign in not wishing to testify to indicate that they support the bill. And so that is a really tactical way that people can help. I also think reaching out, if people look back at my bill from 2 years ago, there is a strong indication of bipartisan support because a very substantially similar version of this bill, a bill that did not have an exemption for penitential communication, was passed by the entire House of Representatives with bipartisan support in 2023. And I think we really need to give really strong encouragement to the members of the legislature, frankly, particularly the Republican members who stood up for this 2 years ago, to tell them we have their back and that they should be consistent in their support of this legislation. So that would be a way for folks to really reach out, and really to reach out to all of the members of the House of Representatives to tell them how important this is. And if there's a personal story to describe why it is so important, personal stories are always very impactful, and I encourage people to share as they feel appropriate.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I know you're incredibly busy, and I appreciate you taking the time for this call and for being patient with my persistence and trying to get it set up.
No, I appreciate the persistence because it's so busy here right now. So
thank you so much. I look forward to seeing what happens on the 14th and look forward to staying in touch as this progresses.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, thank you. Bye-bye.